Okay. Oh, we're live. All right, awesome. This is awesome. This is the first ever live CalCap Studios literary author event. I am so happy to be here with Christine Pelosi and Rob Stewart. I am Ricky Borba, one of the co-founders of the California Capitol Film Office with Charles Lago. Like I said, we are so excited to be doing this. Back in February, before the pandemic, we did an event with Ed Asner. It was amazing. We had about 80 people show up. Ed told some stories. We had Mark S. Allen interviewing him. And then everything kind of changed, and we figured out, you know what? Everybody else is kind of doing this online thing. Why don't we give it a shot? So I'm coming from the friendly confines of my middle daughter's bedroom. It is the best lit house in the room. It's the quietest house in the room. There's a lot of pink and purple behind me. But I've got two people who are just amazing people in the community, Rob Stewart and Christine Pelosi. And a couple quick things about this event that we wanted to do. We want to make these things free to the community because we know everybody is enduring hardship right now. So while they are free, we are still a film office that runs off of actual money. There is a donate button on the bottom right of your screen if you do feel so inclined, or you can purchase Christine's book, which I believe Christine has signed. Is that correct?
Yes, I have.
Yes. And so there's a green big rectangular button down there that says purchase a signed copy of the Nancy Pelosi Way, which Rob and Christine are going to get into in just a few minutes. But I am going to talk about Rob for a second. Rob, you are the host of Rob on the Road. You are in your ninth season, if I did my math correctly. Your last few episodes have been from your house virtually. So I was thinking, Rob, why not rename the show to Rob on the Recliner?
Well, we changed it to Rob at Home temporarily.
There you go.
But that's just temporarily.
Yeah. Very good.
Ricky, it's great to see you. And of course, Christine Pelosi is the person of the hour. And Ricky, what else were you going to say there, buddy?
Oh, I was just going to say it's funny how we met a few months ago thinking we were going to do this thing in person and we were going to, just kind of steamroll right into our literary series. And now here we are 4 or 5 months later doing it live on the internet. So it's just kind of funny how things go. But it was a pleasure meeting you that day. And I'm still really excited for when we get to be back to normal, how we're going to kind of continue this thing.
It was a pleasure seeing you that day, too, as well as your entire team. And you have a great team. I also think it's interesting that you brought up having to change so quickly and pivot with this plan. Yeah. And I think it's interesting you brought up your daughter's room. All of those things tie into our guest, Christine Pelosi, because talk about someone who can change a plan on a dime and not only do that, but find a course and a meaning. That's Christine Pelosi. And she probably appreciates the fact you're in your daughter's bedroom because she has a daughter herself, correct?
There you go.
Correct. You might be hearing her jump around.
Oh, okay. Before I leave the both of you, one quick thing. If you're watching this on Facebook, you are not going to be able to comment. So we would love for you to go to our Crowdcast website, which is crowdcast.io, the letters IO, /CalCap Studios. Click on the Christine Pelosi link. You'll be in the chat room with us and be able to ask questions and watch it from there. So I bid both of you adieu. I think that's how you say it. I've never been to France, if that's where that phrase comes from, but thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christine Pelosi is truly a fascinating human being. Christina has had a front row seat to history, and her mother is the highest elected female in United States history. We are speaking, of course, of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the first female Speaker of the House as well. And Christine has a wonderful book out that I think is something that you can apply to any family and to anyone. It's called the Nancy Pelosi Way. But what this book is about is advice on success, leadership, and politics from America's most powerful woman. Christine, it is so good to see you.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
First, I just would love to get your temperature, so to speak, on the day. And this will be, of course, online forever, but we just crossed a mark of 100,000 people that have passed away from the coronavirus, and your mother held a press conference regarding this. Did you speak with her about this, and what are your thoughts about this?
I did. Such a sad, tragic, preventable milestone. in this epidemic, in this pandemic. If you think of countries like New Zealand and South Korea, who had much more massive testing capacity and much more ability to get people tests, to do the contact tracing, and to give people treatments, and to have people follow social distancing, physical distancing directives that came from the top and were modeled by their leaders. You could see that America exceptionalism was actually working in reverse. And of course, for every family, it's a tragedy. It's not 100,000 people. That's an entire small city. There are cities in California, that are 100,000 people or less. Imagine just losing an entire community. That's what we're dealing with. I actually just came off an hour-long activist call. I talk about them in the book, The Nancy Pelosi Way, that my mom had with hundreds of activists from all around the country, where we were talking about this milestone. The call was led by Vote Vets, but we had groups like Little Lobbyists and Healthcare Voters and Moms Rising and Move On and others weigh in on what's happening, what we can do to try to pass the HEROES Act, and more important, what we can do to try to stay together when you have an administration that is trying to tear us apart. They're trying to other the disease. So we think it's happening to other people and not in our lives. We're trying to other the people who have the disease to make it not be something that we don't think that we can get. And of course, what happens quite tragically when that happens, as we learned all too sadly with AIDS, is that when you other a disease and say, well, it's only happening to people who aren't me, you not only slow down the prospect for a cure because of institutionalized bigotry, but you also end up getting the disease anyway, because guess what? Diseases don't discriminate, people do.
Out of respect, I know she's your mother, but I'm going to refer to her for the rest of this interview, if you don't mind, as Speaker Pelosi.
Sure.
And I also would like to say that you referenced something that you were on earlier today, and you are the head of the California Democratic Party Women's Caucus, and
Yes.
you have been elected multiple times as well. Tell us about that.
I am proud to serve as the chair of the California Democratic Party Women's Caucus. I have a great team of very diverse board members. We serve together and do a lot of work to try to lift up women's rights in the California Democratic Party in California across the board. We took a big leap together almost 3 years ago in signing Adama Iwu's letter. We said enough, and wanted to make sure that we were voices in the party, particularly for young people and young people from communities of color and from underrepresented communities, that when they came into the power structure of a campaign or the state capitol or the U.S. Capitol for that matter, that they were welcomed for their service, and also to try to do institutional reforms within our party, cleaning up ourselves first, but also reaching out to campaigns and organizations to say, look, we believe in equality without apology. We believe that everybody has an opportunity to serve. And we think that people should be judged by their own merits and their best aspirations, not by somebody else's worst day. So we have to be very clear about respect and equity. We have to be very clear about the work that our colleagues that we said enough, the director Samantha Corbin, the director of projects, Alicia Lewis, and co-founder Paula Treat have all said, we need to make sure that when it comes to our politics, that we are modeling the behavior that matches our values. Because so often what happens is that when you're in an organization, when there's a circle, and someone inside the circle complains that somebody else inside the circle has harmed them, the ethos of the circle is tested by whether you stand with the accuser or you defend the accused without giving both sides the due process and the breathing space that they need. It's not about throwing people away. It's about making sure that we're more inclusive. And what we have heard across the country and across the state from Democrats, Republicans, independents alike has been, people don't want to be told, oh, just take one for the team. right? We're young at heart and idealistic, and we don't want to make waves because we want people to be successful. But we know that the way to be successful is to treat everybody well. And so we do a lot of work on that. We also do a lot of work on pay equity, show us the money, and we'll be very, very active, of course, in the campaigns between now and the fall, making sure that our frontline workers, the majority of whom are women of color, have the support that they need, that our teachers, the majority of whom are women, have the ability, our educators, to go into schools and teach in a safe environment. And of course, our nurses, the majority of whom are women, have the protection they need to, as they're risking their lives to save ours. So that's some of the work that you'll see from the California Democratic Party Women's Caucus. And I'm honored to have that support. And I have to give a shout out to the party because I was just elected for the 7th time. I started as a young Democrat on the Democratic National Committee, so I'll be raising Cane on these issues and campaign finance reform at the national level for 4 more years. So here I come.
Started when you were like 4.
I started very, very young. I was elected older than 4. But
let me ask you this: so you know, it's
interesting,
and you talk about starting as a young leader, and you are, in watching and in researching you, I see so many similarities to your mother. Your mother has always ensured, and it's been very important to her to make sure there is room at the table, and not just in the table, but in society, for acceptance of all people. Is that something that you were raised with in your home? Because she did not enter Congress and political life until after you were out of high school, correct?
Correct. But our whole lives, first of all, we were raised Democrats. So we had a really strong belief in diversity and championing all of the power of diversity. Also, from when we were I was like maybe 8 years old, our house was used as a place for fundraiser. People would come to grassroots fundraisers. And so we met all different kinds of people. When my mom was state chair of the California Democratic Party, when I was a teenager, they had a VIP program, Volunteers in Politics. I talk about it in the book, The Nancy Pelosi Way, where if you gave $1 a month, you got a newsletter zip sorted by me or one of my 4 siblings in our living room. And you got to go to a monthly event. The ones at our house had people from a cross section of different communities. It was elected officials. It could have been the leaders of the farm workers. It could have been environmentalists. It could have been civil rights leaders. So we grew up in a time in San Francisco where the city was really changing. And Mayor Moscone was leading the way at City Hall to bring in more people from the neighborhoods and changing that white power structure, even though he was from it. And of course, shattered by the assassination of Harvey Milk and Mayor Moscone, but not thwarted in our effort to have equality. In fact, when I was in high school, my mom worked to get the Democratic National Convention to come to San Francisco. And one of the ways she did that was by having host committee members who were distinctly and conspicuously diverse, including, because at the time people said, why would we go to San Francisco? They have this gay cancer there. Having Jim Hormel, who later went on to be the first openly gay ambassador of the United States of America to Luxembourg under Bill Clinton.
That's what it was openly called. As a pejorative. Yes. I mean, it was not that is exactly, you're using words from the time.
Right. And as today, I know we're going to live on the internet forever, but today as we mark the sad death of Larry Kramer, the founder of ACT UP, who, I remember out there, they were, silence equals death. At one point they were protesting the fact that the city had spent more money on security for baseball games and the playoffs in the late 80s than they had on AIDS. So they had signs that said baseball equals death, which as a baseball fan, was resonant with me. Like, where are your priorities? How are you helping people? So we grew up with that sense of diversity, but not tolerance because that's condescending, but pride in who we were. And essentially that's part of the Nancy Pelosi way, because she was taught to be proud of her Italian heritage as an immigrant. She wanted to make sure that we were instilled with the pride of our heritage and also respectful of somebody else being as proud of themselves as we were of our family.
What are some of the things that, and I know you've written about this in the book, I've read the book, I was glued, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot that is universal about life, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum. I really did. I learned a lot, and I read it with a a lens of wide openness. And I tell you, it's an incredible read. I want to ask you, this lady right here in the red coat, this is the woman that raised you.
Yes, she
How
is.
close are you?
Very close.
You're tight.
We're tight. She's very close to her children and always has been. My mom and dad, Nancy and Paul, met at Georgetown at a summer school class. They fell in love, got married, had 5 kids within 6 years and 1 week. So my mom was pregnant through most of the 60s and did diapers and carpools for most of the 70s and didn't start doing politics until maybe the mid 70s when she was on the San Francisco Library Commission and then started working with the California Democratic Party. So she was the class mom. 4 of us went to the Convent of the Sacred Heart in San Francisco. So I met every night. The day would begin the night before, where we would have dinner, then set the table for breakfast, do our homework, press our Catholic school uniforms, polish our white shoes. The nuns made us wear white shoes, right? Imagine little kids in white shoes, right? A lot of scuff marks. And make sure we had our bath, said our prayers, went to bed, wake up, have breakfast, make our own lunches, assembly line style, grab a nickel for the bus, take the bus together to school. And then she was the class mom. She'd go on field trips. She'd make cupcakes and costumes and things like that. So when she started running for office, for party office, her volunteer base were like my other carpool moms, other people who drove us. And when she ran for Congress, there are a lot of people who came in to work precincts who were like, the front lady at the school, front desk lady at the school, or our friends' parents who said, well, I trusted her to drive my kids carpool. I can trust her, with my vote in Congress. So she was really like a lot of the women who ran in 2018. And I think that's why she has such a close affiliation with the class of 2018 of these moms pushing kids in strollers like she once did and saying, enough is enough. I'm going to step out. I'm going to run. Why not me?
Is she okay with the book?
She is, like all moms and well-educated people, she has some grammar edits and things. But see, when I was writing the book, I was asked to help get the book authorized. And I said, well, I'll do that if I'm the author. I'd written 2 books before and campaign boot camp books. So I wrote the book very quickly over the summer. I wrote it on my iPhone in the notes section of my iPhone because I had not planned on writing a book. I planned on having doing my legal work and having my summer with Bella, going to camp and baseball games back when we could do those sorts of things. So instead, I was writing this book. And because the House of Representatives ethics rules are that you can't do emolumenting, a member of Congress can't participate in something that materially benefits their immediate family member, I couldn't interview my mom for the book or get her stories. So I had to look through her best-selling memoirs, stories that she told publicly, stories that were lived experiences for me. And then, so I didn't talk to her about it. My husband, Peter, was my kindest editor. My sister, Alexandra, the filmmaker, was my toughest editor. And then I had some Team Pelosi campaigners who were able to read it and offer advice. And so that's how the book came together. And I was very respectful of the fact that these were her life lessons that she's already talked about to people. This was not a place where I was going to be breaking new ground. That's going to be for her next book.
Let me ask you this. Speaking of the book, why should people buy this? And I want to say there's a link right below us, Christine, for anyone who's watching that you can click on and purchase the book. Why should people read this?
Well, I think you should read it for 2 reasons. One, because if you know anything at all about politics and are interested in it and like reading about politics, there's a lot of stories in there that are backstories, organizing stories that I think are fairly universal. What it's like to try to get a seat at the table and be told who said she could run or wait your turn or give us a list, we'll do it for you. Anyone who's been in a corporate setting and has faced the scarcity argument, if there's only 1 seat at the table and all you women are fighting for it, right? And then there's the black seat and all African Americans are fighting for that. And, oh, you're a black woman, you're a twofer. Good, we only need 1 seat now, right? And how we transfer that into a community argument that says, if you got the talent, you get to the table and bring other people with you. The second reason that you should read it, of course, is because every day she's in the news making decisions that affect our lives with, an obvious foil in the president. And I do go into some of the stories there about how she keeps her focus in connecting with people and being humble to and open to getting that raw story feedback from people, which I think is a new, more modern form of leadership. As I say all the time in my campaign boot camps, what is intimacy? Intimacy, showing your heart, showing who you are. And oftentimes people do that at the beginning of a career, and then they sort of get hard and they get separated from people the higher up they go. And I think that you should read this book to find out that even at the level of Nancy Pelosi, the highest ranking woman in the country in politics, unfortunately, because we don't have a Democratic female president yet, but even she is still every day working every phone call, covering all the details, listening for the unfiltered story to know the truth for herself from the people who are living it. And I think that lesson in servant leadership is something that I think is sorely needed and can never be reiterated enough. So read the book. It's fun.
She keeps a very orderly house. I watched the entire unofficial swearing in of the last Congress, and I watched her, and she ran that like clockwork. She was calling up the family. She was getting everybody in place. I mean, it was fascinating to watch. And this was before everyone went into the chambers and all was sworn in together at once. This was the photo family time. And she ran that thing like clockwork. And I'm sure there have been many things you've seen her do, some with expression that you probably saw as a child, like maybe the clapping.
Yes.
And I'm walking the middle road line here,
that.
how I do that, but you take it from there. Have you seen that
I think
before?
There's a couple of things. Well, yes, I definitely saw that as a teenager. That look of like, oh, good, you did your homework you were supposed to. Oh, good, you put gas in the car after driving it. Good for you. Nice try.
So you must have known immediately what was going on.
I did know what was going on. It was like, okay, good. That you've now hit the bare minimum. Congratulations. One of the late night comedians had it pretty well. And he's like, that's what every husband gets when he puts the new roll of toilet paper on the toilet paper roll. So I think my parents had a lot of kids, as I mentioned, and my mom grew up with many, many older brothers, all of whom were groomed for public service, and she was groomed to be holy and to perhaps be a nun, which would have made this conversation, and in fact, a lot of elements impossible. So I'm glad she didn't choose the nun route. However, having grown up in a big family and raising a big family, you become an expert in coalition politics, because on any given day, it can change. It can be 3 on 2 and then 2 on 3 and then 4 on 1 and then everyone for themselves and then 5 against the parents. You never quite know what dynamics you're going to get. And when you have that many people that you have to make at least minimally satisfied, one person may get dibs on, okay, what music we're going to listen to, but somebody else gets dibs on what we're going to have for dinner. And someone else may get dibs on what clothes we're going to wear, because she dressed us all alike. So even after we wore all those Catholic school uniforms that were dressed alike on the weekends, we were also dressed alike so she could find us. And I'd find us in public. But she does the same thing with members of Congress. She'll say, you need to be your own unique self. Don't gossip about other people. You just be responsible for your own self. Right. And she's used to these shifting coalitions. She calls it the kaleidoscope of politics. So there could be, one, like today, there was a vote on Chinese human rights with the Uyghur minority, the millions of Uyghur Muslims who are being forced into Chinese concentration camps. But they were doing the work this week with very, very, very conservative Republicans, because they've come together on that issue for a very long time. Then you switch to something else that might be a more classically partisan issue, and the sides separate, but then there'll be a coalition that comes together again if they're talking about veterans or they're talking about emergency responders. So you have to always be able to do 2 things. Number one, understand your own why and that of somebody else. Again, like being proud of yourself makes you proud of somebody else's diversity and respectful of it. And second of all, you have to give people space to be different than you and to want what they want for themselves. And rather than punishing people or being angry at people for being different, figure out what makes them different, what makes them want to be unique, and then help them develop that element to their personality, that element to their public service, because that's where people have trust. And once someone confides in you, Don't be a squealer. Don't tell.
I love that advice. That is, that's one of the things I was talking about, universal advice in this book, The Nancy Pelosi Way by Christine Pelosi. If you're just tuning in, this book is absolutely a read on life and on life skills. And one of the life skills that we all deal with is criticism. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how you handle the criticism when your mom, the Speaker of the House, gets criticized. That's still your mom.
Well, it's still my mom, and but I have years and years and years of working in politics, so I've gone beyond internalizing it. She always
on
says,
major campaigns,
worked on campaigns, and also she's been in the public eye a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So for a long time, I've heard the criticism. And there's two things. First of all, she'll say, don't agonize, organize. She said that on our call tonight. We don't agonize, we organize. So people would say, oh, they're saying something mean about you. She'd be like, great, what positive thing are you putting out about me? Doesn't mean you have to respond to the mean thing. This means put some positive energy out into the world, right? You can't get into internalizing criticism. First of all, because you shouldn't judge yourself or anybody else on their best day or their worst day. Because if you take your highs too high, you won't be humble. And if you take your lows too low, then you will have such a craving for other people's approval that you'll forget to hear your own voice. And so it's important to hear your voice when you're successful, and success can be very loud. But I've got to tell you, and some of the people tuning in certainly know this, and a lot of people who were a part of the book certainly know this. My mom won the House, lost the House, and won it back. And there were people lining up to buy Nancy Pelosi clap pins from me at Democratic meetings who, I remember were yelling and screaming at me that it was my mom's fault that we had lost the House. Not unemployment, not the Tea Party, not the healthcare site crashing, but my mom's personal fault. And shouldn't she just go home right now? And why was I even there? And, so it's just interesting because when you win, everyone wants to be around you and take part of that success. When you lose and you still feel like you have something to offer, that's the time to really assert yourself. So that is why I think taking the long view of criticism and saying, okay, is there a kernel of this that I can work on? Is there something I can be operational about, right? Is there a substantive change I can make to a bill? Is there a behavioral shift that I can have? Maybe someone just feels unappreciated, or I blew them off and I didn't know I blew them off, right? Or I hurt their feelings and I didn't know. Let me sit down with them. Sometimes criticism has a kernel of truth that you have to land on, and that's one thing. But if it's just really mean stuff, you have to just let that ride, because they wouldn't criticize you if you weren't effective. And, tonight, for example, as we do most nights, we're in touch with our friends who are part of the gun violence prevention movement. And they always say it's a club you never want to join, to have a family member, killed by any reason, whether it's COVID or gun violence or poverty or another disease or war. But when you're in that space of personal loss, my mom would always say, well, it doesn't matter what people say about me. They can't take my kids away. And so now that she works with people whose kids have been taken away from them, she has a special responsibility to them, because she can't say to the 1 in 5 children who go to bed hungry, or the moms who report that their children are food insecure, the people terrified right now about COVID and how it's going to affect their lives and livelihoods and life of our democracy, and say, well, Donald Trump was rage tweeting mean things at me today, so I don't feel like digging deep today. No, if anything, dig deeper. It's like they say in a workout, when you're, when the pose hurts, lean into it and breathe harder.
Mm-hmm. We are in a time right now where so many of the things you're saying is, I'm just soaking them up like a sponge. I'm trying to remember them, to write them down. And I love what you just said about criticism only comes with effectiveness. And I also want to ask you, we are seeing heartbreaking community, state, and country heartbreaking, shattering things happen that are huge racial divides, and they're just bad, and they weigh so heavy. And I just want to know your thoughts. And you talked about your mom's call tonight. Did y'all discuss what we've been seeing so much?
We did, actually. We heard from a very dear friend of ours who, in addition to doing other public service work, is a healer. And he was talking about what it's like to be the descendant of slaves and have an Ivy League degree and yet still not know if he's going to be allowed to live for being a Black man in America. And we talked about the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis by the police officers, just that act of brutality that everybody witnessed. And it was so awful and shocking, not because we haven't seen it before, but it still should shock us every time and say, this is a murder,
So can
this
hear
is a
George
crime.
saying over and over, you could hear it, George Floyd saying over and over that he cannot breathe. And that is, I'm just, keep going.
It's terrible. And it's exactly what Eric Garner said years ago. And then they said, okay, well, we're going to teach implicit bias in policing. I was an assistant district attorney. I have, a longstanding relationship, legal, representational, personal, and otherwise with cops. They guard my mom's life every day. So obviously I'm very grateful to police officers and feel a very strong sense of commitment to them. But they've got to be trained on this stuff. This is really, really, really tough stuff. And, it has to be unlearned. This has to be unacceptable. They have to be fired. They got to be charged with murder. They have to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. They have to go back and look at all their other cases and find out, gee, there could be a lot of people free in Minneapolis in the next few weeks as we find out whether or not their prosecutions were racially biased, or, who knows what they did, these police officers did. But I assure you that we are going to find out. So we did talk about how this has to be a moment where, you don't just say Black Lives Matter, but, shout out to the white people. And this is actually what I said on the call earlier, shout out to, my white siblings. We can't just be allies with slogans. We've got to really police our own, because it's not working any other way. And yes, we have to make space for people of color to get up and tell their own story, for African Americans to tell their own story. But we also have to, when we see it, we have to say it, because we're the ones that are raising this new generation. And I'll just say it this way. When Barack Obama was elected president, there were a lot of people that said, oh, we're post-racial. Well, I knew that wasn't true, because my mom was getting a lot of death threats, as was President Obama. And, I was in politics, so I knew how bad it was. And I saw all the othering Obama. I wrote about it, organized it, against it, tried to stop it. But I think that what dispelled that notion once and for all was when Dylan Roof went in and shot up the people at Mother Emanuel Church in the prayer sanctuary in South Carolina, like to start a race war. And the fact that kid was 20 years old and white, right? So much for this, oh, well, these old racists are just going to die out. No, they're raising young ones. And I think that was shocking for a lot of people who didn't live that every day. And I think that when you compare how Dylan Roof did all that and he got arrested and they gave him a burger or something and then brought him in, versus what you saw with your own eyes in Minnesota happen to George Floyd. This man who they accuse him of forgery. So therefore they're going to put their knee on his head, on his neck, and kill him. So it is just, it's horrifying, but we also have to have this moment of clarity and say, so what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do institutionally to talk about institutional justice, whether it's fighting implicit bias in our schools, in our hospitals, because it begins even in childbirth. That's why the Black maternal mortality rates are so high, because Black women are not believed when they say that they are in pain. So it starts really with even during the childbirth process, and then goes to education, child care, having access and opportunity, and of course to community policing, because every family has to have that talk. And on a much, much lesser scale, my stepson is Latino. We had to have that talk with him. My husband Peter and I did when he was, when he was a tween. That talk that you have to boys of color, and that shouldn't have to be this way, but it is this way. And so we have to do everything we can to make it better. And again, I think the answer is twofold: to elect more progressive leaders, to lift up more people of color in all aspects of society and professional, so people see the humanity and the leadership of one another. But also it means making those really tough calls in the moment when you see it, before we go from the ridiculousness of what happened in Central Park with the lady lying about the African-American man who asked her simply to put her dog on a leash, to the murder that we saw in Minnesota.
And the young man that was shot to death jogging.
In Georgia.
Unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable. I just have to say also that I think about your mom and how she's always made room at the table for other people. And I wonder, when she sees such horrific tragedies like George Floyd, with the horrible incident, dying with his neck, and the police officer who just nailed him down. And then also, I have to say, what keeps her going in such a direction positively when such tragedies happen that she's been fighting for decades?
Well, you use your power. They had a press conference today to talk about the 100,000th death from COVID, but they also talked about, she and Jim Clyburn, the House Democratic whip, highest ranking African American in the Congress of the United States. They both were talking about the institutional changes that needed to be made. And actually, my mom, Speaker Pelosi, was talking about Congresswoman Federica Wilson's bill that she has, developing resources for African American boys. And it's an issue that Congresswoman Wilson has worked on for a very, very, very long time, and lifting up that bill and passing that and giving it resources. And Mr. Clyburn talking about making structural changes when it comes to either education or healthcare or broadband or justice, and doing that. So it's a matter of taking a moment and turning it into, what is an act of power that we can do? Yes, it's important that elected officials from the highest levels speak the truth, but they also have to use their power to change the truth and, in effect, take away some of their own power or systems of power, and create new and better systems that are designed to be healing and not violent.
Your mother, you talk about the use your power. She also uses her kindness and her heart. I saw Representative Clyburn today at the press conference, and he brought up that Maxine Waters' sister passed away, died of coronavirus 2 weeks ago. And the kindness that comes from your mom from Speaker Pelosi to all of the members of the House, as a human being, I find touching, because I've seen her sit with the spouses of members of Congress, like Congresswoman Doris Matsui, when her husband, Bob Matsui, died. He was in Congress, and she led the memorial service. She really extends that heart and her faith, just like she did when she turned around and stopped that reporter and said, "Don't bring up the word hate to me."
That's right. I remember when Bob Matsui died. I mean, it was so sad because he had like pneumonia. I mean, it was one of those things, you catch a cold, you never know. So it was very sudden and very shocking when he passed. And I was working at the time on Capitol Hill as the chief of staff, but I flew home. We all flew home on Operation Matsui. It was an honor flight that they had, where members of Congress and staff and family and friends were all on a plane with his casket flying out to Sacramento. We were all in Memorial Auditorium, where he had been rounded up as a young boy to go to a concentration camp. And, there he was being, given the, some of the highest honors. And then I came up later when they renamed the courthouse after him. Again, the courthouse where there had been great injustice against Asian Americans and Japanese Americans, and in particular, coming out of that courthouse, and then to have it named for him, to see that circle of life. And also, I remember when there were other people who wanted to run for Congress, and I had friends who were saying, "Oh, we're going to have a fundraiser for so-and-so who's going to run for Congress." And I was like, you know what? Let Doris Matsui grieve. Let her bury her husband, and then figure it out, because you're going to look like the tackiest person in the universe if you're out there raising money for a seat an election 2 months from now, when the person hasn't even been buried yet. So I think it's really it wasn't just her love of Bob Matsui and her love of Doris, whom actually Doris and I both served together in the Clinton Gore administration. I was at HUD and she was at Commerce. So I knew her in that context too, and her own public service. And that's why I knew what a good congresswoman she would be, because I knew her professionally. But also to say, be human. You're going to have time for the politics, and there'll be plenty of time for politics. But you also have to treat people like human beings, because that's what this is about. Politics is about people. And if we make very, we almost joke about the 3-chambered heart decisions that we have to make when it comes to investing in races and investing in people. When I run my races for DNC or Women's Caucus, my mom will be like, okay, what's the whip count? Divide it by 30%. That's your real number. Now go out and, get more votes and get more votes. I mean, no one's a tougher whip counter, than she is. But at the same time, she'll say, do you know these people? Do you know their stories? Have you really connected with them? Are you just asking them to vote for you? Or are you asking them what they want and what they want from you as a leader? Do people want to be led? That's the first question. Then, do they want to be led by you?
By the way, I want to say there's a ton of people watching. Feel free to ask
guys.
your questions on the bar down here, and just ask away, and they will be pushed to us as well by the facilitator of this conversation. Do you think your mother will run for president of the United States?
Oh, gosh, no. Now, hold on one second. I'll be all right. I just want to get to a better lighting here. So hold on. We're all going to move for a second. And now we're all
because the sun's moving. It's because we've been talking almost for 50 minutes.
Oh, my goodness. All right. Well, so now we're back. I just had to make sure that we had,
The art on your walls, by the way.
When you're at home.
Tell me about the art behind you.
Oh, the art behind me. Okay, well, so at the tippy top, there are 2 pieces of artwork from Visual Aid, which was an art show that my friend Jim used to run for people with AIDS, artists with AIDS who would sell their works. Also behind us is a picture of Barack Obama with my husband Peter and my daughter Bella in the little papoose when she met him. And then there's the ice cream cone, the cupcakes and ice cream cones that Bella made, representing family members.
Very nice.
We have.
Hopefully, she gave you the sweetest cupcake.
The chocolate one, of course. Naturally, she knows. My husband likes carrot cake. I don't quite get that. It's a mixed marriage, obviously, carrot cake, chocolate cake, but we make it.
But right before the lighting changed, we were talking about your mother and possible. Would she run for president, House Speaker?
No, she's never wanted to do that. She's always wanted to be a legislator. She's always wanted to be in the House. In fact, in 1992, her friend Mario Cuomo said publicly, only really just kind of to toot her horn and lift her up, Nancy Pelosi should be considered a vice presidential candidate to Bill Clinton. And she was like, no, don't try to promote me out of here. Because 1, she wanted to stay and have a career in the House. And 2, she would always say, I don't want derivative power. If you're vice president, then your power derives from the president. As interesting as that is, she wanted to have her own power and have it derive from the voters of her congressional district and of her caucus. And so when it came to, once she had made the decision to stay longer in Congress and really build her career there, she also never flirted with going anywhere else, because when it comes to legislatures, like you're a lifer or you're leaving, right? And so people want to know, are you going to stay and only pay attention to us? Or are you just doing this stuff for us and you're going to turn around and run for Senate or governor or president? And that's fine if you are. But then why are we making a long-term investment in you, right? If you're just having us take these votes as our leader so that you can use that as your platform to go off and do something else. So she's very,
it goes
very
back to the
clear
relationship building.
That's right. And
yeah, absolutely.
You have to be aware. These are 435 people, 435 strong egos. And you have to be able to do a lot of ego management. And one of those things that people say is, well, why am I going to take a political risk for you or for the party if you're not going to stay and back me up?
Mm-hmm. Very good point. On some of this country's darkest days, and I'll bring up one, September 11th. I'm curious what your mother, the House Speaker now, said to you during tough times be it national tragedies or in your own life, the words that have stayed with you? What must be shared from your relationship?
Well, part of my relationship with my mom is very instinctive. So we don't really even have to talk to know what each other is thinking. In fact, she's
Hmm.
often disappointed if she has to tell me something more than once or at length. She'll say, remember, we can talk shorthand to each other. But
Oh,
on 9/11 itself, I was actually working on Capitol Hill, and I had gotten to my boss's office about 8:30, and we were just going over the morning schedule. And what happened was our scheduler came in and said, there's a plane that hit the towers in New York City. And we're like, oh my God, what a terrible accident. Maybe it was a commuter plane, something like that. So we turn on the television, and for a few minutes, we're like, oh my God, that's really, this is really bad. We don't know where this plane came from, what happened, did they lose control? And then we saw the second plane. And the minute we saw the second plane bank its wings, like I count that as the moment that I lost my innocence.
too.
Uh, because you're like, oh no, this is serious. Because you wouldn't bank your wings unless you wanted maximum impact and danger. So we saw that. That was horrifying. We were asked to leave and tell other people not to come in because we were told there was a plane headed right to the Capitol. So because I was a chief of staff, I went with my boss to the Capitol Police where they station where they had members and security. And it was a really bright, beautiful morning, as everyone remembers. So it was, it was deceptively beautiful of a morning, a beautiful fall morning. And we went to the police area there, and just for a minute, because all the members and all their chiefs were gathered, I saw my mom. Just for a minute, we were mother and daughter, and we hugged, and then we stopped, and then we went to where we had to go and did the work. And then later that day, and I write about this in the book, later that day, my mom really wanted to go back to the Capitol. She said, we have to go back to the Capitol. We have to stand there and just show they're not going to destroy us. We're not afraid. And Capitol Police were like, forget it, right? They're like, we don't want you to, it doesn't want to happen. Other people didn't really want to do it. And she said, no, we should really, really do this. And she said, I'm going because I'm not, I feel like we should go. If it's safe and it's surrounded by all these people now, and there's nothing, all the planes have been grounded, we should go. And so they went. And that is the backstory of how they ended up being on the front steps, Democrats and Republicans, Senate and House. And the people in the Capitol Hill community, they're watching them when they all together said a prayer and then sang God Bless America. So
The backstories are so important.
And they're so important because that's the spirit.
And it's also a huge part of your mother's success, Speaker Pelosi, with having the relationships and then the backstories that brings the relationship, and she knows how to count. She told you she got to know how to count. You know your votes, and there you have it. I would like to ask you as we wrap up, I always want to ask, what is it that you would like to talk about that you were not asked or that you haven't been asked before?
Well, I've probably been asked all of it before. Let me just say this about relationships in politics. Let's close on this, getting back to our intimacy and seeing inside somebody. I think that a lot of people, when they go into politics, they develop a different persona. It's almost like they feel like I'm going to put on my suit of armor, right? And there's a certain idea of what that persona should be. And it's typecasting usually as like the straight white guy with the power tie that went to an Ivy League school, is wearing a red tie and has all the credentials in the world, and therefore people trust him because he came out of central casting.
Right.
And one of the things that my mom has taught me over the years is be your own authentic self. You're the secret sauce. If you're a match for people, if you're a match for your community, then they're going to trust you and have faith in you. When you start pulling away from them and deciding that you need to put on, it's like when we were younger, they'd say, don't put on airs, right? Just be yourself. The more yourself you are, you might get more criticism for it because people will say, oh my God, you eat chocolate ice cream, or oh my God, you don't exercise, or you do exercise, or you you like music that I don't like, you like things that I don't like. People become very, very risk averse, because they think, well, in order to hold on to power and be more things to more people, I should be less of who I am and adopt this persona, a professional persona of what they expect of me. And that's always the biggest mistake, because two things happen. First of all, if you get on a power trip, you start to think that you're invincible, which of course you're not. And that's unhealthy and unhelpful. But also, it also means that you don't give it 100%. It means you're leaving something behind. Because if you're leaving your true self out of politics, then you're leaving behind perhaps some of the greatest gifts and vulnerabilities that you could be turning into strengths. And if you think about it, there are any number of times when you'll think, I could just dial this in. We could just be incrementalist. We could just go for the lowest common denominator, and the caucus won't be fighting, and Democrats won't be in disarray, their famous thing, Democrats in disarray, right? We could, we can just do a little bit here and a little bit there and kind of find the aggregate liberty. But the problem with doing that is that if you don't get to the core of why people are really there and what they really care about, and you don't try to go for the boldest common denominator, you're leaving so much progress on the table. And that would be a shame. So if you're going to go, and as she says, if I'm going to be eating cheese out of a box in the middle seat of an airplane, traveling around the country, missing my husband, missing my family, missing my grandchildren, missing, things I could be doing with my life, then we're going to go all the way. We're going to go all in. So if you're going to get engaged, the Nancy Pelosi way would be to say, do it your way. Find out what your way is and do that.
Yeah, if you don't bring your best and your worst to the table, then you really are leaving out, like you said, the secret sauce, because the greatest moments and the greatest tools for me have come from my worst experiences, not my best. And I've only been able to grow by sharing the really, really bad ones. That's where you've been able, for me, to be able to feel like I can make an impact. And you have touched me so much today. I'm a better person for having talked to you and knowing you. I feel like you should send a bill for a therapist because you're that good with advice.
Because I'm just telling her advice. It's her advice, but it's good. And I think that as we wrap, I think it's important for people to remember, take your biggest risk.
Yeah.
Right? Because why not? Why? If you care about something so deeply that you want to really pursue it and you're really, really frustrated, get your yayas out, yell and scream at your TV or on your Twitter feed. Not too much, but some. Or on mine, at SF Pelosi. Come find me. But then get into it. Get into the fray. Because what do you have to lose? We've already lost. We're already in so much loss and so much time of renewal and changing the way that we approach things, changing the way that we are with each other, changing our intimacy, what we see and what we allow people to see about each other. I think we need to take this moment and really do what my mom did from the first speakership to the second, where go from being the public figure to being the public person and really finding our humanity, because that's what's going to get us through this.
Yeah, I really salute you for writing this book, The Nancy Pelosi Way. I could write one, The Penny Potter Way, my mama.
There you go.
But this is really good. And I just have to tell you that we truly appreciate you for sharing so much of your time. Remember, click on the link below if you want to buy the book. The book will be signed by Christine Pelosi. And Christine, thank you for all of your advice.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. Good night, everybody.
It's been a joy to be with you and with all of you for watching. And this will be free to share. Please share it with your friends and spread it all throughout the country on your social media app, as well as anywhere in the world. Okay? Thanks. Bye, Christine. We appreciate you so much.
Bye.
Christine Pelosi.
Good night.
Good night.